Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, August 17th, 2022. Time for a lot of things. Time for a lot of things, as they say. No, I don't know if anyone actually says that, but at any rate, it is. There's no choice. We have to go forward, and there's too much forward momentum in our news gathering to stop now. Okay, so lots to catch up on. Of course, it being Wednesday, that makes it the day after Tuesday. Yesterday having been Tuesday, I mean, this has independent significance. Don't worry, I'm getting there, Your Honor. Tuesday, of course, these days, at this period of time, in a year like this one, a primary day, so some results to round up, including the one that everybody had an eye on, even though everyone knew how it was going to come out. The Wyoming primary, the one and only one Wyoming congressional primary, because they only have one congressional seat because there's 15 people in the state, and apparently at least 8 of them voted for the other lady. And so Liz Cheney is done. She has lost renomination for her congressional seat. She may or may not have plans to run for other things. We may or may not care about those things that she's going to run for. Her run on the January 6th committee will come to an end at around January 6th of next year. January 3rd, I presume, will be the end date when the currently sitting Congress dissolves, or rather adjourns sine die, and then swears in a new Congress, whoever's in control there. And that will also be, for the moment anyway, the end of the charter for the January 6th committee. They might, if Democrats continue to hold on to a majority in the House, reauthorize it. But, of course, if Republicans are in control, then, of course, they'll be reauthorizing the Benghazi committee instead and bringing that back. And, of course, the committee to investigate the committee that was investigating January 6th will be launched as well. So either way, Liz Cheney wasn't going to continue on the January 6th committee. Either she was going to be bounced out of Congress, or the committee would end. I suppose if she had won and then won re-election, and then the Democrats held on to the House and reauthorized the January 6th committee, and it's not clear that they will want to do that anyway, but we'll see. Then I suppose she could have continued in her service on it, although it would have been unlikely that she would have been named to the committee by the Republican conference. So, anyway, in all likelihood, it was coming to an end. Anyhow, she was getting it all out, leaving it all on the field, as they say, and laying out the case as clearly as she could. That part of the January 6th conspiracy, and whatever else you might call it, which she was willing to lay out. And it's not entirely clear that she wanted to tell the entirety of the story. She is, after all, a fairly conservative Republican, and one with pretty strong ties to a lot of people who would be in a lot of trouble if all of what happened on and around January 6th was in fact revealed. I still suspect that she's not interested in telling the whole story, let's say, of Ginny Thomas. But anyway, we're grateful for what we were able to get out of her, but it's a good opportunity to remind everybody that Liz Cheney was no ordinary Republican, not just because of her departure from the Donald Trump orthodoxy, but also because she was a nutty Republican before Trump defined nutty Republican, and she remained one. And she did, in fact, vote with Trump when he was in office. I think the number that they put on it was 93% of the time. She departed in important ways, clearly, at the end. But there are a lot of people circulating a lot of write-ups about what Liz Cheney was really all about before her emergence as a figure of interest, let's say, on the January 6th committee. And gosh, now I remember why we were so stunned to see her performance on the January 6th committee, after all. Oliver Willis is one of them. Also in circulation, a 2013 piece from Jonathan Chait in New York Magazine way back, under the title of Liz Cheney is even more bonkers than we suspected, if you're, in fact, interested in reviewing why we need to remember what her past was all about. But I'm sure we'll have some opportunities to do that. There's plenty of other stories. Greg has a collection of them to share. I do too. Things that we haven't gotten to in the past couple of days, which may or may not break through onto the show today, depending, I guess, on whether or not any search warrants or subpoenas are served during the next 2 hours, which is always a possibility because the Republican Party is full of criminals, and we have to keep tabs on them, and there's a Justice Department in place to do that, and it looks like they're working. All right, well, Greg's here, so we might as well just dive right into it, because what else were we going to do? Just dip our toes in? No, it's only 2 hours. We got to get started. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. I just thought, it's my weekly reminder that today is Sanitation Engineer Day, so
Yes,
Abby the
okay.
dog may decide to be on the show later.
We have not heard from her as a correspondent in some time.
I know. She's been on assignment.
I see. All
which
right.
is to say I keep throwing her outside.
She may be getting used to the whole thing, and just now she's jaded by her fame.
Not only that, that guy hasn't called for a while during the show.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know who that guy is, but, he just
Yeah.
keeps calling at 9:15 asking for money.
Yes, and you say,
Well, primaries are over, so, maybe not so much.
that could be it. Maybe that was that it? Was it the primary?
Yeah, it was mostly,
Election
I
race?
couldn't get
Okay.
you last night at dinner, which was an inconvenient time for you, so let me try getting you at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is also an inconvenient time for you.
Yeah, there's like 22
Did you know that
other
Val
hours.
Demings is tied with Marco Rubio?
Oh, well, that is important.
Right.
I'm glad that is that what they were calling you about?
Among
Because that would have
other
been a good
things.
call. Because that's said to be true. I think there was even a poll that put her a few points ahead.
4 points ahead, and of course you
so
can
far.
question the poll, but that's three
I
in a
will.
row that said that they're tied. On the other hand, the jaded among us will say, well, that's because they haven't dumped their tons of money that Rubio's sitting on, and so what appears to be a tied race now is going to be a walk-away win for Rubio in the fall. We all know that. Don't waste your money, yada, yada. Of course, these are people who really don't know because nobody knows because it's such a bizarre year. And I think that, part of the thing here is that there's just so much going on that the usual pundits just don't have a way to process it. The usual way that you process things is you look to see what's happened in years past, and then you put together a credible, whether it's a data analysis or whether it's just in your head, based on experience kind of feel for what's going to happen. Everybody knows that if you have one party in the White House, then during the midterm, that party loses seats, except for the couple of times that it didn't.
Yeah, right. But other than that,
they do, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody knows, for example, I
happens a
said
lot.
this morning on Twitter, Kevin McCarthy is going to be Speaker, and therefore nobody really wants to say that the upshot of the Liz Cheney loss in Wyoming is to highlight the fact that McCarthy, who hates her, isn't qualified to be Speaker, whether morally, intellectually, or as a human, because he's an awful human. You couldn't have anybody who's just salivating at the idea of I want power and I don't really care what I do and how I get it. It's just that he might be in power and you need to have access, and so the pundits won't just flat out say
I
it.
guess. I do wonder sometimes when we're reminded just kind of how dim Kevin McCarthy really is. And, of course, also so shallow and like with many Republicans, just want power for the sake of having power. But it's difficult for me to get inside his head and imagine what does Kevin McCarthy think he'd like to do with the power? Because I think that he just thinks, I
punish
got
his
a
enemies,
cool car, I guess. And
That is the entire GOP now. And that's
Yeah,
what Liz Cheney was saying. I have a vision of what the
That
party
could be.
was, but it isn't that anymore. So I understand that you reject me because basically the only thing you care about is punishing your enemies.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be part of that. Although I have an enemy myself I'd like to punish, and that would be Donald Trump. And so Rather than be your congressperson, I'm going to take all my money that I've raised and I'm going to start a new PAC, which is called the Great Task PAC. And I'm going to use the money to, try to defeat people like Kevin McCarthy.
All right.
And for some reason, McCarthy doesn't like her. I don't get it.
Oh, well, gee whiz. I don't know. She was a source of a lot of headache for a while, and then she came right out.
Yeah, she
and
kept
said,
holding up a mirror,
and
and he didn't like what he saw.
Well,
he was looking at the picture of Dorian Gray, and he hated it.
Comb your hair. All right. Yeah, well, okay. He's a terrible person. He's bound to be a terrible speaker if he even becomes speaker. I guess there's some doubt yet about that because he's not widely popular.
Right, and Trump will turn on him. And the other side of the coin is that Democrats are doing better than expected, and that's the whole thing about pundits. They don't really know what's going to happen this year because this year is so different. Let me give you some examples.
All right.
Republicans saw this as a red wave, but that's not what happened in Washington State. And, for example, big article in Politico about that specific thing. They point, and Dave Wasserman has done it as well. Sean Trendy has done it. A new powerful signal that Dems' midterm hopes aren't lost. Primary results in Washington State track with general election results, and Democrats did much better in 2022 than 2010 or 2014, although not as well as 2018. The last two times Democrats suffered catastrophic midterm losses, an early warning came out of the Pacific Northwest, but this year, the indication from Washington State suggests something very different, more middle-of-the-road outcome. So in a neutral outcome, with things moving toward Democrats, I think that's a much better position than anybody thought they'd be a couple of months ago.
Well, certainly. And when the assumption was historically you can expect massive losses and loss of control of the chamber, that's a pretty dire picture. So anything that says, you might make it is pretty good.
Here's the senator from Hawaii, Brian Schatz, saying, I feel like the media is having a hard time metabolizing the fact that this Congress has been historically productive.
Yeah, so
acknowledging the size of the accomplishments, the degree of difficulty is just hard to accurately do without sounding left-leaning. Like postal reform was such a standing, seemingly unsolvable issue for every Congress for a decade. It seemed not doable, but that's done. We all know the difficulty of passing an infrastructure bill. Done. The taking care of veterans who have had toxic exposure, especially burn pits, was also something being pushed for many years with no success. Done. Word about that. In Connecticut, we had our primary last week, and the Republicans in Connecticut decided to go all Trump, like everywhere else, and they nominated a nutcase named Leora Levy, who won the Connecticut primary for U.S. Senate. It's probably the last time you'll hear her name because she's going to lose badly. But my point is that all of a sudden, Dick Blumenthal ads, who she's running against, have started appearing on cable and local TV. And interestingly, his first set of ads highlighted his championing of reproductive rights. And his latest one was a very, tug at the heartstrings appearance by the widow of a veteran talking about the fact that burn pits probably caused his brain cancer, and she got nowhere in trying to deal with it until Dick Blumenthal got involved and, helped pass the recent burn pit thing that Republicans turned their backs on. He's using it very effectively in ads, and I suspect others around the country are doing the same if they're running for Senate on the Democratic side. And it's an example of, I didn't see this coming, but there it is.
Yes, I mean, I assume that...
How do you make Dick Blumenthal interesting? Well, he's for reproductive rights, and he fought for us to get this thing done when my family was absolutely at its wit's end, and I'm testifying to it. It's a pretty effective ad.
Well, that's good. And as you say, it was hard to predict because, I guess even 3 months ago, even if you were getting early inklings of the red wave not necessarily materializing, 2 months ago, you still would have said, but Republicans won't step on landmines intentionally, like blowing up or trying to sink a veterans aid bill. And then they did. And insulin and everything else. Yeah.
And everything else. Brian Schatz again. Violence Against Women Act reauthorization with new provisions for Indian country. Biggest investment in Native communities ever. Done. And by the way, if you don't think that doesn't play well in Alaska, well, you don't know anything about Alaska. In fact, if you don't know what lower 48 means, you shouldn't even be commenting on Alaska.
Yes, well.
We all now know what's in IRA and CHIPS, but when you add all this up, it's just not a lot of bills. Each one of these was thorny, complicated, difficult, and ambitious. That brings us to the IRA bill that just passed with a very funny set of tweets from Obama and Biden.
IRA.
Because after Biden signed the bill, which is the biggest climate recovery act in like ever, Obama tweeted, this is a BFD.
There you go. Okay. Well, that's
and
the thing
Biden tweeted back, thanks, Obama. Which is actually pretty funny.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Well, all right. So they are aware of all internet memes.
Right. So, all of that is good. And you can laugh at it. The Dark Brandon stuff. You always laugh at Obama, but especially Biden about this because Biden is like, hello, fellow kids. But that's okay. The point is he passes this stuff. The real question is going to be, does the climate bill passage and signing make any difference whatsoever to younger voters who are the ones who have most soured on Biden, according to the polls? And I suspect yes, but we won't see it. We do know, however, that the reproductive issues have made a major, major difference, certainly in Kansas, for example. But here's Tom Boner saying, look, remember the surge in registration among women voters in Kansas leading up to the vote 2 weeks ago? We released a new report today showing increasing proportions of women among new registrants in other key states, all since the Dobbs decision on June 24.
All right.
I have more news to share. Even since our report this morning, we've acquired new data in additional key states as we look at voter registration trends. The results are truly remarkable and suggest Kansas was not an anomaly. In Pennsylvania, for example, among those voters who have registered to vote since June 24, women outnumber men by 17 points. Oh. Women outnumber men by only a 4-point margin in the electorate overall in Pennsylvania.
There's just not enough women in Pennsylvania, apparently.
Well, there's just not enough women, right?
Yeah,
more women voters, we do better. It's not just Pennsylvania. Our report pointed out the surge in women voters in Michigan and Wisconsin as well since June 24, but we have fresh data in another key state, Ohio, where the share of women among new registrants in Dobbs was 11 points over men compared to less than 3 points prior to 624. As I noted after Kansas, we're seeing early signs of what could lead to a huge increase in women voting, the so-called pink wave. These registration patterns closely resemble that of younger voters in 18 post-Parkland, which fueled the blue wave that year. The surge is young and female. And so, there it is.
Okay. Well, I wish there was it's an easy nickname for it, but pink wave. Okay, fine. We'll take it.
It's the pink collar, blue collar, white collar stuff.
Sure. It all has to do with
snapshot
collars.
In Virginia 7 puts Representative Spanberger up 5% over opponent Yesli Vega, 46-41.
That's very moderate. 5% is right in the middle. That's good.
Yeah.
You don't want to be 10%.
She's right in the middle.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, she could be 10% in the lead, but she doesn't want to overdo it.
Right, exactly. So, they're all good signs. None of these are guarantees, of course. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, well.
Okay. But the whole electorate is aware of a lot of different things. And the Supreme Court, as somebody put it, typically what happens is that in a midterm election, the reason that they vote against the president's party in the White House is because they want a counterweight to whatever the president is doing. But this year, it may be that what they really want is a counterweight to the Supreme Court.
All right, well, that's important. Obviously, the Supreme Court, we've always been insisting, should be on the ballot every time. We actually should probably put that on the ballot and vote on it. But okay. It's been on the ballot, so to speak, for decades, and only now has the alarm bell really rung and people have actually gotten it, I guess. Well, okay. I wish we had not lost your rights along the way, and you do too, but Thank you for registering.
Here's an interesting rant I just came across from, of all people, Josh Barrow. Remember, there was all this pseudo-controversy about whether or not Democrats were aiding the nutcases, like Mastriano, for example. Blake Masters in Arizona. And Mastriano's trailing by a lot in the latest poll, more than double digits, same with Fetterman winning over Oz. But Josh Barro has a interesting commentary about this, and he says, in the view of the Republicans who cry foul at these actions, that is to say, supporting the nutcases, it's the Democrats' responsibility not to back Trump or oppose him. It's to ignore him as they try mightily to do the same in hopes that it will cause him to disappear. That is, Democrats are supposed to participate in the Republican strategy to get DeSantis nominated. It's their duty, even if it entails giving Trump a pass on criminal acts, and even though it will make Democrats less likely to win the 2024 election. Well, it's fine to want things, but why on earth would Democrats do that simply because Republicans want them to?
Well,
that your party is led by an inept, impulsive, criminally inclined man who's viewed negatively by most voters, who cares very little about whether your party wins elections or achieves policy goals, and who keeps causing the party to nominate his unappealing weirdo personal friends and otherwise winnable Senate races. That's your problem, one largely of your own making. No self-respecting set of political opponents would respond to this in any other way than by putting the screws to you as hard as possible. He's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely
good.
right. So, you want to complain about the fact that Democrats appear to be meddling? It's Republican voters, like in Wyoming, where there was no meddling by Democrats.
No.
There's 8 Democrats. They all signed up to vote for Liz Cheney. She still lost by a landslide. Yeah. That's Republican voters saying, we are loyal to Donald Trump, and we may be only 30% of the, voters, but this is how we feel. And we are loyal to Donald Trump, and we think that, Donald Trump does everything right and you guys do everything wrong. Well, fine, but that's only 30% of the voters. And so if everybody else turns out in opposition, you lose, and that's okay. And anything you do that can build that. For example, by pointing out that Republicans are incredible extremists when it comes to reproductive rights or, fighting against veterans, or defunding the FBI.
Yes, right.
Which, as you know, I think is a horrible slogan. Thank goodness they adopted it.
Yeah, don't do it. It's not like we didn't warn you.
Well, then, that's on you.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly okay for Democrats to have a complete and total strategy of trying to paint these guys as extremists every possible way. They thought they were going to do it just with Dobbs and the Supreme Court decision. But in fact, Trump is allowing them to make this all about Donald Trump. That's exactly what Republicans don't want, to Josh Barro's point, and too bad for you. It's about Donald Trump.
Stop doing it. I'm just thinking of the metaphor there. We're all set to paint them as extremists, and then they grabbed the bucket out of our hands and dumped it over their heads and put it on TikTok. It's the paint bucket challenge.
We're ready
I won't
to
let you
paint
paint me.
extremists,
Look
and
at
then you
this.
decided to nominate Todd Aiken times 100.
Okay, I was all set to do that, and then you just jumped in a vat of paint, and now I don't have to paint you. But by the way, the answer is run that ad anyway, because honestly, you can't bury him deep enough.
Right. Now, we only have a few minutes before the break, but I have to digress, and because I can't stop laughing, and I don't want to start chuckling over the microphone, and you'll say, what's going on here? Jared Kushner has a new book.
That is funny. Is it a children's book that this is one he's decided to read? Is that what you mean?
Jared Kushner, Breaking History, a White House memoir, and it's reviewed in the New York Times. And the line that came to mind as I was scanning this is, reading this book reminded me of watching a cat lick a dog's eye goo.
Well, what? Oh, yuck. I don't even know why that's funny.
Right. And then it's just, it talks about how both soulless and shallow it is.
Yeah, I mean, what else how could it be otherwise?
Right. There's a couple other good lines in there.
All right. Well, I did see someone sharing a line from a review, but yeah, go ahead.
You finish Breaking History wondering, who's this book for? There's not enough red meat for the MAGA crowd, and Kushner hasn't appealed to them anyway. Political wonks will be interested, maybe, to a limited degree, but this material is more thoroughly and reliably covered elsewhere. Basically, he's a pair of dimples without a demographic. What a queasy-making book to have in your hands. Once someone has happily worked alongside one of the most flagrant and systematic and powerful liars in this country's history, how can anybody be expected to believe a word they say?
Yeah, that's the quote I saw circulated, and I mean that's pretty salient right there. But the rest of it is kind of funny too, just about what an empty suit he is, and a skinny suit at that.
Yeah, a skinny empty suit, right? Which is exactly what's on the cover. So Jared wrote a book. Who cares? He didn't write it, and it's terrible.
Yeah, I don't know what he.
Oh,
thinks
by the way,
he's
he
writing
didn't
a book
write it.
about. Yeah, right. Well, that's the heart of it.
By the way,
There's just nothing.
I mean,
to see.
I'm of two sides. I think you should both sides this. This book is really terrible, and by the way, he didn't write it.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Certainly, there was no. I don't know anyone clamoring for the.
Got to have a copy
tell-all.
in advance. One of the more interesting things is watching the Fox News nighttime pundits who have their pulse on MAGA World. Take a look at what's happening to the big story. And the big story, of course, is still the Mar-a-Lago impoundment of information and material and top secret documents that Trump wasn't supposed to have.
Yeah.
And Laura Ingraham said maybe it's time we move on from Trump. At least the voters might think that.
That's
and then Tucker Carlson said, look, we all know he's going to be indicted. We all know where this is leading. Right. Which is basically to set it up so that when he's indicted, they can say, this is old news. Let's move on. I already talked about that like in August.
Yeah, I mean, it's an attempt. It'll be exciting old news, though. And
I think somehow or other it'll still get talked about, so that part is kind of semi-interesting. But, that's basically what's going on today.
Okay, well, that's a good wrap up, and I still am surprised that he would bother writing a book. Well, first of all, he's not. I don't think he's hard up for money. I mean,
no, he just got $2 billion from the Saudis due to the blackmail from the top secret documents.
But there's never enough for those guys.
That's only speculation, but it would be irresponsible not.
But the idea that he needed a tell-all. I mean, the whole administration was every day was Jared and Ivanka's friends told everybody what was on Jared and Ivanka's mind. Who needs a book?
After the break, we'll talk about how lawyers don't want to defend Trump.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I believe as we were exiting, we got cut off, so we were telling you after the break what we'd be talking about, and I think Greg was going to tell everybody that he won the lottery, or was it something else?
No. It's just Trump, this is the Washington Post story. Trump is rushing to hire seasoned lawyers, but he keeps hearing no. The former president's current legal team includes a Florida insurance lawyer who's never had a federal case, a past general counsel for a parking garage company, and a former host at far-right One America News. I think he should just hire Rudy Giuliani. Oh, wait, Rudy's kind of busy in Florida right now.
Yes, he's also lost his
Lindsey
law
Graham
license.
was a jag, He's got lawyer type. Wait a minute. He's kind of busy in Georgia, too.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. Can you imagine a sitting senator pleading the fifth to everything?
Sure. Go ahead. I imagine that he will. I don't know.
Because the alternative would be to tell the truth or lie on the road, So those are your three choices.
Yeah.
None of them are good.
I'll be very curious to see what they ask him and how bad it looks. So, we'll get that. Well, I guess he'll be testifying to a grand jury, so we won't get the chance to see that for a while. as it'll be secret, but there will be some off-the-record discussion of generally what he said, I'm sure. And certainly if he pleads the Fifth Amendment, that makes the reporting very easy, and they'll just count the number. It'll be done, what's that CBS News reporter who loves the numbers, counting everything. All right, well, his name will come to me later.
Big Bird? No, that's the count.
Number of CBS News reporters, White House News reporters, whose names I've forgotten, 1. I'll get it in a minute. I'll go searching. So okay. Trump can't find any lawyers. The parking garage stuff, though, could be very important. You never know when that might come up in litigation, parking.
Well, look what happens to his lawyers. On the one hand, Patsy Baloney,
yeah,
and also, I guess, Eric Hirschman, the very colorful lawyer, both subpoenaed by the Department of Justice. And so parallel to the criminal investigation of why Trump has top secret documents he's not supposed to have is this thing about the fake electors. And that's still going full blast. And that's, of course, what's being looked at in Georgia. Meanwhile, how is all of this playing across the country? I'm just going to give you some latest polling stuff. This is pulled right from 538. And this is Pennsylvania Senate, for example, Fetterman. Last couple of polls,
yes.
July 22nd through 26th, Fetterman with an 11-point lead over Oz. And then July 29, August 1st, Fetterman plus 17, Fetterman plus 16.
Nice.
That may be a bit of an exaggeration. Essentially, looking at everything, 538 gives Fetterman an 11-point lead overall, which is pretty good. And by the way, the governor race is important there because Mastriano is terrible. And Mastriano aggregate has an 8-point lead, but the latest polls have him 10, 11, 13, 14 points behind Josh Shapiro. So that's all good news there. For example, let's look at Arizona, because that's where a couple of other nutcases are running. And Katie Hobbs has a 5 to 9-point lead over Kari Lake. And on the Senate side, where Mark Kelly is running, where is U.S. Senate over here? Kelly has like an 11-point lead to 14-point lead and 16-point lead in the last poll over Blake Masters. So, yes, it's good to raise the ominous idea that Trump is winning his battle to have his people in key races and places, including Secretary of State. But again, I would point out that the Trumpers are only 30% of the electorate. And when you start going in a general election, even without including what happens with younger women and younger voters starting to register in big ways, but especially women, even without that, the fact of the matter is that what Trump wants, which is to look at 2020 and nothing else, and look at him and nothing else, it is not playing well with the general electorate. And so a lot of his acolytes are indeed winning their primaries, like, in Wyoming. But whereas Wyoming will be a Republican win because it's probably the most Republican state in the country, that's not the case everywhere else. And when you look at Arizona and other more purple states, they're doing very badly. They're going to lose.
Okay. Well, that's good news for me
what about,
personally.
Don't be overconfident. What about complacent? We're Democrats. We've been told that we're going to lose the Congress this year. There's no complacency here. This is just what it is.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, if you're just reporting, I'm just telling you what the polls say. I can't help it.
I can't help it that we're winning. It's not our fault. Oh, well, why do you say it that way? Well, because we're Democrats. You have to apologize for being ahead.
Right. Well, yeah. So imagine if we were Canadians. Forget it. We'd never say
They're apologizing for us being ahead.
They just do it as a matter of habit.
They just do it. That's just who they are.
It's okay. We love them for it.
Yeah, and of course it's not Canada, but they're close to Canada. So let's look a little bit about what's going on in Alaska in terms of the primary, which I thought was far more interesting than the Wyoming primary, which was already a given in old news.
All right.
Okay. Alaska had 2 races yesterday for the same seat, 2 completely separate races, which is one of the many things that makes Alaska confusing. First of all, they went to ranked voting, which means that until the absentee ballots are all counted by the end of the month, you don't really know who won. But secondly, they had one race, the Alaska at-large special, to fill the seat of Republican Don Young, who died.
Right.
And then they have a separate election to see who's going to run in November in a jungle primary style runoff with ranked voting, if that's not complicated enough. Huh. And interestingly, who do you think is ahead?
I don't know.
The Democrat.
Well, all right. I did not
Democrat,
think that. Who is that?
Peltola, who happens to be indigenous, Native American, has in the at-large special to fill the seat now. Peltola has 38%, Sarah Palin has 32%, and Begich, the traditional conservative Republican, whose name sounds like a Democratic dynasty name but isn't, has 29%. And in the Alaska at-large race for who qualifies in the fall, the three of them have, but again, Peltola, the Democrat, is in the lead with 35%, Palin with 31%, and Begich with 27%. So those three will run off again in the fall, but in terms of who occupies the seat until now, it might well be a Democrat. And part of the reason for that is indigenous support. It's 15% of the electorate. And part of the reason for that is Begich's people can't stand Palin. And so their ranked choice second vote might actually either nobody or Peltola, who Palin likes. They're friends.
Okay, well,
small state, they serve together, all that sort of stuff. But it's just fascinating dynamics, and we're not going to find out who won either of those races for a while. Yeah. But the point there is Palin didn't win in a walkaway. In fact, she's trailing right now.
That's good. Maybe she will walk away or run. She prefers running, as I recall. Well, that's good news. Good news that a Democrat is the beneficiary of a split in the vote there.
There's a split in the vote, plus although conservative and evangelical voters love Palin, some of even them were saying, the problem with her, she spends too much time in the lower 48. And as I said on Twitter the other day, if you don't know the term lower 48, you shouldn't even be commenting on Alaska. It's a big deal there.
Clip, magazine, lower 48. Yeah, one of those sort of terms. There was that time that she was going to move to Arizona, which she really missed out on that opportunity because now Arizona is the place, it's like the leading edge of the Cuckoo Bananas MAGA sword. And she could have moved there and given up on the Alaska base. But although she would have occupied a weird place there, right? I mean, it's all about the rejection of the McCain machine now that Carrie Lake has won the nomination and made that a focus of her speech. And it would be hard for her, although her fans are crazy enough to just follow her through it, to just throw off the McCain mantle there, having run as his vice presidential nominee. But, I suppose if she went out there to a rally and said, I hated him the whole time, they would cheer. So,
right. Maybe. When I was a kid growing up in ethnic Yonkers, New York.
Yes. Okay.
If you went to an Italian or a Polish or Irish family on your block, and chances are 99% of the families on your block would be, there was always a picture of John Kennedy.
Yes.
Right? Catholic president and all that sort of stuff. It was just there. I mean, just everybody had one.
Okay.
So when I visited Alaska, and I just sent you a copy of the map. The Alaskan map is like on everybody's wall. It's a giant Alaska and a little tiny lower 48 at the bottom right-hand corner. Everybody has that. Everybody has that.
Yeah. They're like the old New Yorker cover with the map, right?
But I mean, it's just a thing. And so the point is not that you use the phrase lower 48 like you use Clipper magazine. The point is, if you think that somebody's being branded as not from Alaska, you're going to lose.
I guess so. And there's a lot of people
we care about Alaskans here, not so much what goes on south, And so if you're not representing Alaska, then we're not voting for you. And that's part of the problem with Palin. There's this whole thing in the party there, the Republican Party, not if she's too extreme, but rather, is she doing this because she's just interested in the publicity, or does she actually want to buckle down and get to work?
Oh, well, duh.
And that's not something that they themselves, the evangelical conservative voters, have felt like they have an answer to for themselves.
Okay.
We know the answer, but they feel like they're struggling with it.
Well,
and that's
all right.
why she's not ahead.
Good. She's lost her luster in the lower 48, too, and now we even have a replacement for her day-to-day foibles of her stupid hillbilly family. Lauren Boebert has taken over that role for herself. So there's just no space for Sarah Palin, and an entire political generation has grown up without her in the news and has very little idea who she is.
Right. So Alaska
cool.
U.S. Senate, Lisa Murkowski's got 44%. Chewbacca have 40%. That's a Republican endorsed by Trump running against her. And so they'll go on and advance to the general.
What's the actual
And for
name?
Alaska governor, Dunleavy has 42 and Gara, the Democrat, has 22. Just to give you an idea that there's a tremendous amount of ticket splitting, and Alaskans think of themselves as independent voters.
Oh, yes.
Which I think, like Georgians, get to qualify.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine by me. They occasionally do break with tradition and send somebody completely different, and okay, fine. And occasionally even do things like seriously consider people from the Alaska Independence Party, even though they turned out to be the same violent extremists who are at work in the lower 48, but they've got a weird streak there, and it's, I don't know. It's a northern state thing, I think, maybe, plus a western independence, plus being out in the corner of nowhere and separated from us by Canada. I assume has to foster that.
Oh, and by the way, there's parts of Alaska that in winter get very cold.
Yes, I assume so, and probably always.
Not always.
No.
Yeah, I mean
pretty cold compared.
When I was in Anchorage, it hit 90.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's our fault. Sorry about that.
No.
That's not your doing up there in Alaska, except for all the
just
oil
like
drilling.
England, they are not built for that kind of weather.
No, that's true. Hopefully it won't last long but they're not the only ones having their weather extremes. We're all suffering together, and maybe stop drilling all that oil.
Well,
that could help. Okay,
it's one of those Texas versus Alaska jokes when I was a kid.
Oh.
Texans say, well, we have the biggest state, and Alaska says, no, we're bigger, and Texas says, yeah, well, not after it melts.
No. Well, maybe that was the aim all along.
Yeah, maybe.
Just burn all your oil.
Unfortunately, stuff's real, and again, that's one of the reasons why that climate bill that just passed is at BFD.
Yes, not that any Alaskans were voting for it.
Right, the IRA stands for climate. I don't know if you knew that.
It does now. I just got used to it as a
Also
retirement
healthcare.
account, and now it's something completely different. Anyway, so now I find myself singing "Sorry" with the fringe on top in front of IRA, and no one's calling it IRA, I guess. Okay, well, that's good. Alaska has melted, so there's no more news from there. Anything else to
there's a
cram
very
into
good
that?
article in
We have
the
time.
science journals, but also in the conversation about the COVID lab leak theory.
Oh, yes, right.
Dead.
Yeah, you did mention that on Monday. Is there more on that?
No,
is it deader than it was before?
I'm just watching this disseminate, and we're having a nice discussion on Daily Kos about whether things like facts mean any more to Republicans. But I think it's less about facts and more about repetition. Let me say that again. I think that adults learn by repetition.
I see.
And so, when you start just seeing it repeated over and over and over, that's one of the reasons why the Mar-a-Lago thing is so big. It's one of those stories that just gets every hour on cable news repeated again and again and again and again. And, it sinks in over time. And I think in the end, long term, that sort of thing has an effect. Now, what kind of an effect? Well, look at this. This is Politico. GOP slashes ads in key Senate battlegrounds.
Yes.
The NRSC canceled over $10 million in ad buys as candidates struggle with fundraising.
Oh, well.
And, of course, they have a big picture of Skeletor. No, that's not Skeletor. That's Rick Scott at the top of the picture. The cuts totaling roughly $13.5 million since August 1st come as the Republican Senate campaign committee is being forced to, quote, stretch every dollar we can. They're starting to triage races. They've cut ads in Pennsylvania, Arizona. Remember I was just telling you about those polls?
Yes.
Wisconsin. and Nevada.
Yeah, and that's where you would imagine they might want to intervene. But I guess by the time they had to make the decision, these races seemed so far gone that they were beyond their capabilities in intervention.
People are asking, what the hell's going on, said one Republican strategist working on Senate races. Why are we cutting in August? I've never seen it like this before. So while the scale of the cuts is unprecedented, the NRSC is also ahead of its typical schedule on ad spending, having already spent $36.5 million. But they've spent that much money and they're still trailing. They've spent that much money and Rubio's still behind by 4.
All right.
Weird.
Maybe
I don't know whether I want them to it's
stop
not a red
spending
wave.
Or keep going. Which do I want? Well, what I'm getting is
Right.
they're stop spending. And
There's also incompetence involved here. Another Republican strategist referred to the recent cuts as unreal, noting the NRSC has not eliminated any ad time in New Hampshire, where there won't be a GOP nominee until mid-September, and there's no frontrunner.
Well, maybe they still think they can influence that race.
Right. The DSCC thinks Rick Scott simply failed.
Okay. Well, I mean,
which may be. Nobody
Ds.
likes him. And by the way, he wants to cut your Social Security.
I mean, I imagine that's unpopular in Florida, but
I would imagine it's unpopular
I
everywhere.
would have thought anti-Semitism was unpopular in Florida too, but
Marco Rubio is trying to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I got for today. That's really most of it.
Okay.
This is
Good.
Steve Bannon writing in
Stop.
Rachel Maddow's blog, MSNBC. It's not just that Biden succeeded where Trump failed. It's Biden succeeded where Trump failed. Infrastructure, Medicare negotiations for drug prices, addressing gun violence, record drop growth, penalties for stock buybacks. These are all things that Trump promised to fix and didn't. Biden promised to fix and did. So again, Democrats will have quite a bit to run on in the fall. And as David Rothkopf observes on Twitter, all of this from the Pundit Roundup, by the way, the POTUS, the VP, and so many of their team are everything Trump disdains. They're smart, hardworking, a little dull. They keep their word. They focus on governing. They understand policy. They respect the law. They actually care about others. They're public servants. That's what drives the Republicans crazy, of course. And Biden, in some ways, has simply been, as we've talked about on the show, and many other people have as well, making Biden's theory of the case here, which is to say that on the one hand, when he says he can get bipartisan stuff done, he can simply by letting the Senate negotiate with itself instead of him intervening. And on the other hand, showing that the best way to fight Trumpism is with good governance, and also at the same time painting the opponents as extremists, which he's starting to do in his speeches. And so how is it working? Well, again, I point to the polls saying that for the most part it appears to be working fairly well at this particular point in time. Well, everybody knows that Republicans have so much money, they're going to just dump all sorts of ads, and, well, they're pulling their money because they don't have that much money.
That's good.
Oh, I didn't
Another
expect
surprise.
that. Well, you didn't expect a lot of women to register to vote after Dobbs either, because all the male pundits said, oh, well, no big deal, we'll move past this pretty quick. And in fact, that's not the case. People
I actually
aren't
don't
over
even
it.
remember anybody ever saying that, but they certainly could have.
Oh, they
But I
had
think
Republican, unnamed Republican operatives.
They were just
quoted in
hoping.
stories.
Yeah, so they were hoping that they wouldn't register. Okay. And I guess maybe in their universe, their wives weren't registering, or if they were already registered as Republicans.
Well, again,
anyway.
that's the flip side of the coin that people always ignore. We keep being told by those who follow it that you have to understand that in Fox News and in that medium and in what people say on right-wing media and how they speak, a lot of this stuff is a big deal. And then you get to the general election where you get to turn that around and say, you have to understand that right-wing bubble isn't as big as they think it is.
Yes. Well, it's all encompassing for them, so I understand why they come to the conclusion that everybody thinks like this.
Yeah.
But,
And no, you may not be aware of all the stuff that Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham says, but we're aware of a lot of it. What I'm saying is there's a lot of independent people who aren't aware of it and don't really care.
Yes, true. Occasionally it filters through, though, which will happen when they're always in constant competition to one-up one another and even themselves in how crazy they get. And eventually it rises to the level that even independents take note. I did see the news about that. That was weird for him to call for an Nazi revolution. That seems like a bad choice of words. Are you sure? You meant
defund
that?
the FBI. Did they really say that?
Okay.
Yeah, they really did. They actually said that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they've been quite open about that, which
Back
is really
to blue.
remarkable.
Defund the FBI. Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense.
No, of course not. And but it's been a long time coming since I don't know,
remind you, it
smashing
plays
cops
worse
over the
in
head with
Wisconsin.
flags.
So good luck to you, Ron Johnson.
Yeah, Wisconsin is a real disaster at the moment. We were just reading about how far the extremely, and I guess the most extremely gerrymandered state legislature in the country, and how far they're willing to try to go with the power that they've stolen through this gerrymandering.
As far as they can.
We're real close, real close to finding out.
Remember, that's, they, like Michigan, are really into trying to limit the power of whatever Democratic governor gets elected because, we're not giving anything up.
Yeah. So they're two places at the tip of the spear on that.
But even a reminder, even in places like Ohio, you can win because it's elected for reasons that I don't understand. A majority on the Ohio Supreme Court this fall.
Yeah, I'm not certain I can explain that, but it is happening. Although I wonder whether some of it has to do with reaction to, just the inherent weirdness of voting for people on a Supreme Court when the governor's son is on the Supreme Court. I think that worries people. That inherently triggers something in their voting behavior. But yeah, and
on an equal playing field, it would matter.
They ignore the Supreme Court.
They think that they can gerrymander things enough so that there's not an equal playing field. It's that simple. So
yeah,
it's not simple to overcome, but got to get out.
Wisconsin's really in some serious trouble if they can't get it together.
Right. Anyway, luckily in Wisconsin, we had Ben Wickler in one of the best Democratic state parties in the country.
That's true.
We know that because Tony Evers is governor.
Yeah. And that's really basically the issue that's at stake here is when you actually count the votes of all the residents of Wisconsin. What do they call themselves? Wisconsinites. Yeah, okay. Wisconsinites. And you actually count up, hey, do you want to be governed by Democrats or Republicans? The answer is Democrats, which makes it all the more unreasonable that it's like a 60-something percent, 70 almost percent Republican legislature because of the gerrymandering, and they have no fear whatsoever of losing the majority. It almost cannot happen. Unless, of course, everybody gets out there. But if you ask the state at large which direction they mean to go, and the government continues to go the other direction regardless of everything that the voters say, I guess at some point, I don't know what options are available to you, but people get awfully mad. So
right. And again, so let's be clear. I'm not guaranteeing a Democratic win in November. I'm simply saying there's a lot going on. And we don't really know what's going on. And those who say, well, Republicans are guaranteed to win, they absolutely don't know what's going on.
We can guarantee that it's not guaranteed for them. That we can do. I guarantee that it's not guaranteed for them.
Yeah. Well, we need a column from David Brooks about why the Democrats have already lost.
Yes, well, he's really gotten out front on that. And I think he was even, he didn't move on to the Mar-a-Lago search yet, I don't think. But on the day that news was breaking, he was running his second article about like January 6th overreach or something like that. How old is he? And doesn't he want to maybe move to Florida?
He's like 39, but he looks 68.
That could be it. That's your problem. As we have Benjamin Button writing these things. But are we almost done with him? Is he at the end of his run? He could be writing until he's 90. I don't know. Well, I hope he finds a hobby because he's really he drives everybody crazy. And that might be his hobby, unfortunately.
All right. So here you have David Brooks 6 days ago, August 11th. Did the FBI just reelect Donald Trump?
Yes, that's it. All right. He did, in fact, move on.
So he did, in fact.
And it was terrible.
Decided to cover that, and it was just as bad.
That's awful.
He's terrible.
Wow. Okay, well, then we really do. We should defund the FBI because they're reelecting. Yeah, imagine in the middle of New York and in the middle of his circle of people.
Yeah, I think that's the column that sparked the whole movement by Andrew Yang and others to set term limits on New York Times columnists.
I mean, it upset a lot. I mean, it was outrageous. The news or the entire country. Although sometimes I wonder, maybe we're in our own bubble. I'm sure that's the case to some extent. And how could he possibly? But I think that he was pretty out of touch on that one. That's the Dr. Oz crudité of New York Times opinion columns. So okay, well. That'll bring us almost to the hour. I appreciate your carrying us all the way through.
Somehow. Anyway,
Yep.
Take care, and we'll be back tomorrow, and I have a feeling stuff will happen. We'll talk about it.
Almost certainly. Rudy Giuliani has arrived for his deposition by car, in case you were wondering. There was a topic of discussion yesterday.
I thought he was going to walk.
Yeah, hang glide. I understood that he was not supposed to, or he said he was not supposed to fly, but it sounds like he was just using that as an excuse to try to see if he could get out of the testimony. My guess is he actually did fly, but at any rate, he arrived in a limo of some kind, and all the cameras are there, so everybody's interested. So we'll have a sweaty.
He's going to plead the fifth in between drinking a fifth.
Yeah, that's right. I think what he meant was, please, may I have a fifth before I begin my testimony. So it'd be interesting to see whether anybody describes him as possibly inebriated. It is a little early. But not for Rudy Giuliani. Yeah. As you know, he says it's 8 a.m. somewhere.
I want to know if he's dripping hair dye.
Yeah. Oh, almost certainly. There'll be a lot of flop sweat. So
yep.
We'll look forward to pictures.
Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Very good. And let's see. We can move on from there to add a couple of, let's see. Well, what do I want to add in the next 30 seconds? Anything that I can do? Oh, gosh. There's an awful lot, but none of it will fit. But maybe we can spend a little bit of time on the flip side of this break. It's only a 1-minute break, after all, discussing or reading through some choice elements of the writing now circulating about Liz Cheney and, who she has been historically. And so maybe that will soften the blow if you're one of the people who are taking her loss personally or seriously or whatever, then perhaps we can at least soften the blow for you a little bit. I don't know if that really describes our listeners. I think we've all been pretty clear on who Liz Cheney is. I'm glad she's done a terrific job illustrating how terrible Donald Trump is, and that seems to be her superpower. Great. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Well, I should probably put this piece aside for analysis and discussion at some later date. It is also, just as it is Sanitation Engineer Day in Connecticut, it is apparently Lawnmower versus Blue Jays Day here at KITM headquarters. So a little hum of the lawnmowers. They were coming by earlier. I thought they were done. And you may have noticed I tried to mute the microphone during Greg's part in the discussion. Some of which, that gives them plenty of opportunity to get the hell out of here with the lawnmowers. But they're back, so what can you do? We'll just work past it. Let's go back to Liz Cheney being a jerk and losing, but not for the reasons that, not the same reason that we think she's a jerk, but for different reasons. She loses her Republican primary, and there are many ways to see it, of course. And I guess the only thing that can really sum things up is I am very appreciative of the work that she did on the January 6th committee, and if that was all there was to her political career, that would be great. But it isn't the case. And on the other hand, yes, we're losing somebody who, did a fantastic job in exactly the very narrow role that we needed her for, but there might just not be any such role left for her in Congress. So, okay, she can move on to playing the same role elsewhere, and I have a feeling she has more to say, and she'll use her last couple months in the House productively, and then depending on what direction she decides to go next, whether that's no direction whatsoever, so that leaves her free to do whatever she wants, or continues in politics, runs for president, for all I know. And, uses that platform to continue her crusade against Donald Trump, that would be great too, and I'd be very appreciative of that, but I'm not voting for her. But okay, it's not required. But I happen to see, for instance, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of writing about looking back on the rest of her career. Oliver Willis is doing that, and I see he's tweeting that around, and Armando is, dismissive of it because, of course, I remember very well who Liz Cheney is, but she's been doing a good job now, and we ought to recognize that. Okay. Done. In the meantime, Armando's not here, so I'm going to read Oliver Willis's thing, plus some other things, just as a reminder of who we're dealing with, in case you need one. Cheney, democracy, well, this is what set Armando off, the headline of Democracy Doesn't Need Defenders Like Liz Cheney. Well, it kind of did, but not the old Liz Cheney. The current, I guess we could, of course, make it more accurate. Maybe democracy overall and her idea of what democracy is isn't in accordance with our own outside of the context of prosecuting Donald Trump. But, okay, the prosecution of Donald Trump does need defenders like Liz Cheney, even if democracy as a whole might not. Cheney, he says in his subheader, is the problem, not the solution. How so? The roots of Liz Cheney's loss in the Republican primary were sown by the same Republican Party she's seeking to preserve. A lot of people making this point. Her father became vice president in 2001, in part thanks to outright thuggery, as the so-called Brooks Brothers riot of conservative activists, including Roger Stone, was sought to shut down voting as part of the successful effort to block Al Gore and Joe Lieberman from attaining the presidency and vice presidency. And remember, we discussed them a little bit the other day, too. I was reminded of how far Republicans went in needling Democrats to just shut up and get over it when they had won the popular vote and thought that the election was being stolen from them. The popular sentiment was that Democrats should shut up and just learn to live with it, as opposed to, sack the Capitol, ask to defund the FBI, threaten FBI agents with death, etc., etc. I don't recall that ever happening, but okay. Anyway, the outcome of that attack on democracy was 8 long years of corruption, war, torture, true, mismanagement, racism, bigotry, and financial disaster. So much for the good old Republican Party, the Liz Cheney Party. He continues, in the wake of her ouster by election denying Trump supporters, Cheney will be lionized as she repeatedly has been for the last 2 years. This will largely come from mainstream reporters and far too many Democrats and liberals who think Aaron Sorkin storylines are real life. The narrative is just too juicy for some. Here is the Republican apostate in her own house calling out the current lord and master of the party for his anti-democracy rhetoric and incitement to violence on days like January 6th. But like her fellow purportedly anti-Trump ilk on the right, this is a movement without much there. When you take away the admittedly clumsy and brutish rhetoric of Trump, what remains is the same substance supported by the George W. Bush, Dick Cheney wing of the party, the same substance which the party has allied itself with for years. And it isn't democracy. It's Republican rule over the will of the majority, just done with an inside voice instead of Trump's shrill tweets or whatever backwater social network he's on at the minute. From 2017 to 2020, Cheney marched in virtual lockstep with Trump in Congress. She voted on his side on the key issues of the day 92.9% of the time. I believe I rounded that up to 93 before. That includes votes in which Cheney and her fellow Republicans continued the right-wing attack on voting rights in this country. She voted with Trump against restoring parts of the Voting Rights Act and with him in opposing updating ethics rules, including the disclosure of presidential candidate tax returns. Even when Trump was out of the presidency, Cheney voted with him, voting against the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act last August. Her fellow so-called democracy defender, Representative Adam Kinzinger, also voted against that bill. The Democrats, representing the true pro-democracy movement in the federal government, voted in the majority for its passage. That's not even getting into Cheney's love of invading foreign nations, banning abortion, attacking transgender rights, or cutting taxes for the super wealthy while denying health care to middle-class Americans. Not even. It's nice Cheney criticizes Trump's thuggery. Her condemnation of his actions while serving on the January 6th committee have been good to hear. But to quote Chris Rock, what do you want, a cookie? You shouldn't get an inordinate amount of credit for doing what you're supposed to do in the first place. The bare minimum requirement of our elected officials is that they support the concept of democracy. That is, I will add, that mechanism which installed them in the first place. Like, you should love that. But what they want to do is pull the ladder up behind them, so they don't. He says, we shouldn't be holding parades in the street and administering embarrassing tongue baths for someone doing the minimum and, frankly, below that, because when it comes to the substance of defending the integrity of the ballot, Cheney is against it. Her future is fine. She's the wealthy offspring of one of America's most prominent political families who now has national political exposure. But stop holding her up as a hero. She isn't one. Apparently, she's going to transition from the House and into a role leading a PAC, probably as a launch pad towards some doomed presidential campaign. There is no appetite within the Republican Party for Cheney, and the idea that she is going to lead an exodus of rule of law Republicans/conservatives is a liberal fantasy out of an episode of The West Wing. These things do not exist. Republicans like the political thuggery of Trump, or rather, Republicans like the political thuggery. They enjoy the political thuggery of Trump, and they've liked it for decades when the quieter voices of John McCain, Mitt Romney, George W. Bush, and her own father, Dick Cheney, communicated the exact same idea and themes. The party hasn't truly changed, and Liz Cheney really hasn't either. Don't buy the latest con job, and definitely don't send more of your money to be wasted propping up the kinder, gentler attack on democracy. All right. That seems certainly well within bounds, and what was it that it reminded me of at the end there? Oh yeah, right. Well, just thinking of all the people that he was rattling off here, the quieter voices: John McCain, Mitt Romney, George W. Bush, her own father, Dick Cheney. Yeah, I mean, ultimately they were perfectly happy to label Democrats as demons and restrict voting rights, and I mean, saying some of the most outrageous things, by the way, about abortion. Let's see, other contributors to this genre today include John Nichols in The Nation. I hope Liz Cheney wins, he wrote, I guess, yesterday, but I couldn't vote for her. And you wouldn't have to because you don't live in Wyoming, but if the idea is that she was going to say run for president. Cheney is appealing for Democratic crossover votes in today's Wyoming primary. That would be yesterday's, of course. But she's still a right-wing zealot, in case you forgot, in the Coal Creek Coffee Shop. Got to go to a diner for real opinions. In Laramie, Wyoming, a few weeks ago, a woman recognized me, not me, but John Nichols, that's amazing, and struck up a conversation about what has become the most closely watched congressional race in the United States. She explained that she was a Democrat, but that she would be crossing over to vote in Wyoming's Republican primary to cast a ballot for embattled Representative Liz Cheney. It's a way to push back against Trump, she said. He wants to get rid of Liz. Well, I'm going to vote for her. That's not an uncommon sentiment among Wyoming Democrats. As I wrote in my Nation piece on the primary, in which Cheney's re-election prospects have been dimmed by the former president's enthusiastic campaigning on behalf of challenger Harriet Hageman. And that occurred to me, yeah, didn't we say it yesterday that in Wisconsin, the names we were rattling off included a Hageman? I don't know that, I doubt that there's any particular connection. I mean, you know, I wouldn't think that if they were both named Jones, but Hageman. All right, well, we'll find out one day. Anyway, Wyoming allows so-called crossover voting. A lot of people who don't regularly vote in Republican primaries are planning to cast a GOP ballot today for the incumbent representative who has become the Republican Party's most high-profile critic of Trump's incitement of insurrection on January 6, 2021, and the general lawlessness of the former reality TV star who has replaced Ronald Reagan as the grand old party's icon. That's a nice way of putting it. I think that's probably true, and that would embarrass some of them, I think. And by the way, as far as the charges of meddling go for crossing over, I think Hageman cleared like 60% of the vote. And, so, yeah, let's put that stupid idea to rest right now. Cheney, a lifelong Republican with a record of fierce partisanship, that's true, has been reaching out to Democrats and encouraging them to briefly register as Republicans and cast a ballot for her. This isn't an embrace of bipartisanship on Cheney's part. It's practical politics. Well, not that practical. It didn't even come close to working. Cheney's far behind in the polls, and no one thinks she can win the Republican primary with the votes of the apparently very small number of constitutionalist conservative Republicans, quote unquote, who approve of her work on the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack. She needs voters like John Robinson. Ah, yes, John, a prominent Wyoming civil rights lawyer who told me after watching the January 6th committee hearings, he decided to go public with the message that though a lifelong, well, it says democracy, but he probably means Democrat, he would be casting a GOP ballot for Cheney. A republic hangs in the balance. Robinson explained, the stakes could not be greater. Although, again, I would remind everybody, I understand the interest in re-electing her to frustrate and foil Donald Trump. But, I mean, I just don't know that there's any more work for her to do. I'm not even sure that even if Democrats win the House, retain the House, that they would continue the work of the committee in the same way. I mean, they probably would reauthorize the committee because there's certainly more investigating to be doing. But without Cheney there, I don't know that it gets done the same way. And even if Cheney were there, like I said, I don't know that the Republican conference bothers putting her name up. But we might, I suppose, put her in the organizing resolution and put her on the committee. But it's just one voice. I mean, Kinzinger's gone too. That Cheney, I mean, if it were down to just Cheney, I really don't know how, well, I mean, I'd rather have her doing that than not. But then again, I mean, she'd leave work for the committee and go and vote with all the Republicans in the House. And now it'll be just someone else doing that, true. But I don't know. So, I mean, it's no great loss, really, in terms of legislating. It's zero loss. Anyway, so to say our republic hangs in the balance, well, it hangs in the balance of the continuation of revelations about January 6th and getting people a full picture of what happened. But now it's time for the DOJ to take over these things, and people should be, more people, a wider circle of leadership at the top need to be in legal jeopardy, not just being exposed. The exposure part is done. So if you're worried about that, realize that was likely coming to an end anyway. The stakes are high. Trump is consolidating his hold on the GOP, as recent primary results from Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and other states confirm. Wyoming is what Politico refers to as the latest stop on Trump's scorched earth revenge tour against Republicans who voted to impeach him after the January 6th insurrection. 4 of the 10 anti-Trump Republicans in the House have decided not to seek re-election in GOP primaries. They were likely to lose. 3 were defeated by Trump-backed challengers, and now Cheney, the most prominent member of the group, is fighting to hold on to the seat once occupied by her father. You know who that is. If Cheney loses, she did, Trump will be that much stronger as a force within the GOP and as a likely bidder for the presidency in 24. I am in the camp that would like to see Trump's ambitions get tripped up in Wyoming, and I have no problem with Wyoming Democrats, a distinct minority of the electorate in a state that hasn't backed a Democrat for president since Lyndon Johnson in '64, choosing to send a crossover message. I've always embraced the historic progressive commitment to open primaries, in which voters are free to take the ballot of the party with the most interesting races. But I would have a hard time voting for Cheney. While I very much respect her vote to impeach Trump, and while her work in the January 6th committee has been exemplary, I'm not comfortable taking her side in a fight for the soul of the Republican Party. I've covered this fight for many years, both as a reporter and a historian. I've celebrated the radical Republicans who reformed the party more than 168 years ago at Ripon, Wisconsin. And I hope that I've got the pronunciation of it right, because it's like historical and everything. But anyway, I've written favorably about 20th century Republicans who stood on the right side of history, and I've praised Republicans like former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who have challenged not just Trump, but the broader drift toward authoritarianism within the GOP. That's where my problem with Cheney comes in. She's not a maverick Republican who's breaking with her party's cruel policies on economic, social, and foreign policy issues, along with Dick Cheney, with whom she worked closely on political projects before she decided to move to Wyoming and run for Congress. Liz Cheney, for decades, has been in the forefront of the fight to make the GOP an extreme right-wing party. As a political operative and more recently as a leading Republican in Congress, Cheney established herself as a neoconservative warmonger whose crude attacks on immigrants, Muslims, and progressives carried the same venom as those of the most extreme members of her caucus and of the 45th president, whose election in 2016 and re-election bid in 2020 she enthusiastically supported. Don't forget that. I was fooled. Yeah, well, then maybe you're not worthy of being in Congress. What can I tell you? Although lots of people get fooled all the time, including many of our own. Before the recent falling out, Cheney voted with Trump 93% of the time, and when she broke with the former president, it was often more to take more extreme positions. How about that? There's a link here. I wonder what that would be about. Cheney is an outspoken critic of abortion rights, a vigorous foe of efforts to control gun violence, and an ardent advocate for cutting social programs, reducing taxes on the rich, and balancing the budget in favor of the Pentagon. Before the 2020 election, Cheney used a March 2019 Meet the Press appearance to decry Democrats as, quote, the party of anti-Semitism, the party of infanticide, the party of socialism. Cheney claimed that Kamala Harris sounds just like Karl Marx, and her attacks on Representative Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were so vicious that Jim Zogby, the founder and president of the Arab American Institute, told Cheney that her rhetoric smacks either of a deep-seated anti-Arab or anti-Muslim bigotry or crass politics designed to prey on the bigotry of your base. Well, it turned out not to be her base. Ha. In either it's disgraceful. The word shame appears right below this in this column. So in either case, it's disgraceful. Your party has been playing this game for a decade. And here it is, shame. Zogby's reference to playing this game for a decade is spot on. The Republican Party is certainly denigrated under Trump's dangerous leadership. Degenerated. I was like, that can't be the word. But she denigrated him, but degenerated. That was it under Trump's dangerous leadership. But that degeneration began long before Trump announced his presidential bid in 2015. It is often said these days that Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, and Dwight Eisenhower would be unwelcome in the contemporary Republican Party. Frankly, Reagan, too. But the same thing was said when the Cheneys were employing big lies, believe it or not, to promote an illegal and immoral war with Iraq, a bloated military-industrial complex, tax cuts for the rich, and the Tea Party approach to domestic policy, which, if there was ever a direct predecessor identifiable to Trumpism, that's got to be it. Trump was able to take charge of the Republican Party because it had already embraced so much of what he stood for. The line should have been drawn long before Trump came along. Instead, Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, all the Cheneys really, and others like them created a Republican Party that was ripe for Trumpism. It's good that Liz Cheney and a handful of conservative Republicans have finally objected to the worst excesses of Donald Trump and his minions. I respect the motivations of Wyoming Democrats who will vote for Cheney in order to push back against Trump, and I sincerely hope that the Republican Party can throw off the extremism that has claimed its soul, but that extremism has deep roots. I'm just not satisfied that replacing Trumpism with Cheneyism is a sufficient exorcism. Okay, I kind of like the way that's summarized in the end. And then finally, to go way back, people were retweeting this piece today, a New York Magazine piece by Jonathan Chait from March 2013. I previewed it before saying, Liz Cheney is even more bonkers than we suspected. How bonkers was she? About, a decade ago. Liz Cheney's op-ed in what was then today's Wall Street Journal, again, March 29th, 2013, is an important and alarming document. She is not a marginal figure. She served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs in the Bush administration. Do you remember that? Her dad's administration? More important, she is a very close ally of her father's, and the two have exhibited every sign of sharing a worldview in essentially every particular, which suggests that something very much like her brain held, depending on your point of view, either the second most powerful or the most powerful job in American politics for 8 years, meaning her dad, of course. And she, and thus by extension her father, is obviously stark raving mad. How so? Well, I'll tell you. Even after 4 years of bug-eyed right-wing paranoia, oh boy, nothing compared to what we've seen, right? Cheney's op-ed stands out for its utter dearth of the slightest whiff of perspective or factual grounding. President Obama, she tells us, is the most radical man ever to occupy the Oval Office. He has launched a war on America's Second Amendment rights. He does not want the economy to grow. The quote here is, he believes in greater redistribution and of a much smaller pie. Obama, quote, seems unaware that the free enterprise system has lifted more people out of poverty than any other economic system devised by man, unquote, which is odd because Obama is always saying things like, quote, business and not government will always be the primary generator of good jobs with incomes that lift people into the middle class and keep them there, unquote. Actually, kind of yuck. But all right. The best approximations of America's future under Obama are tiny European nations that lack control of their own currency. If you're unsure of what this America would look like, Google Cyprus or Greece. These are all the things that she accused him of. One might charitably attribute Cheney's crazed rants on domestic policy to her attempting to opine on matters outside her field of expertise. Yet her litany of foreign policy accusations is actually even more unhinged. Obama, she argues, has not only weakened America, he wants to weaken America's world standing in the same way that he wants to shrink its economy. There is no longer a question of whether this was his intent, was her quote. He wants to, quote, preemptively disarm the United States. And Trump just wanted to give away nuclear secrets, but whatever. She fears that we will somehow lack the nuclear capacity to deter foes that might obtain the tiniest fraction of our nuclear strength. Obama, quote, advocates slashing our nuclear arsenal even as the North Koreans threaten us and the Iranians close in on their own nuclear weapon, unquote. She believes, quote, Al-Qaeda is resurgent across the Middle East, unquote, and that Obama, quote, stood by and did nothing in the face of the attack in Libya. Remember that one? They might revive that one. An especially bizarre belief considering Obama's specific responses to the attack in Libya and general 4-year record of endless drone strikes and, well, you know, killing Osama bin Laden. Deranged millennial paranoia of this sort has a long pedigree in American thought, both on the far right and the far left, though crucially only the far right-wing variety has managed to operate comfortably within the two-party system. The most telling piece of Cheney's rant may be a quote she uses from Ronald Reagan in 1961 as a preface. And the quote is, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they, in their lifetime, must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. Yeah, I remember that whole quote. Anyway, there is one confusing passage in here. This. Reagan warns that if you and I don't do this, then freedom in America will be extinguished forever. But what is this? This, by the way, referred to the stopping of the enactment of Medicare. Yes, that was his recorded message to everybody in America to vote against Medicare, or to urge their congressional representatives to do the same. In that speech, Reagan argued that establishing Medicare would inevitably lead to the government dictating by fiat where doctors could live and work, and then also inevitably to full government control of the entire economy. Oh well, we can still hope. There's more from this speech, by the way. We'll read it into the break. The doctor begins to lose freedoms. It's like telling a lie. One leads to another. First, you decide the doctor can have so many patients. They are equally divided among the various doctors by the government, but then the doctors are equally divided geographically, so a doctor decides he wants to practice in one town, and guess what happens? Well, anyway, we're going to be running out of time here as the music starts, but the doctor wants to practice in one town, and the government has to say to him he can't live in that town. They already have enough doctors. You have to go someplace else. And from here, it's only a short step to dictating where he will go. From here, it's a short step to all the rest of socialism, to determining his pay, and pretty soon, your son won't decide when he's in school where he will go or what he'll do for a living. He will wait for the government to tell him where he will go to work and what he will do, and not your girls. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I think we'll probably continue with this reading of the Liz Bonkers is what? Even Liz Bonkers. Yeah, Liz Cheney. Why not? Liz Bonkers is even more Cheney than we suspected. That's about as good a reading as I can give it. But this quotation of the Ronald Reagan speech, I remember the speech, or at least these pull quotes from the speech, mostly because they're in my my ancient document that I keep here in print that we were given and helped distribute back when I worked on the Hill, back in 1993 or so, during some of the healthcare debates, and we were calling out, what was then 60 and is now, I guess, 80 going on 90 years of Republican rhetoric on healthcare and social spending, and how it was going to lead to the imminent and inevitable decline into socialism of the United States, and yada, yada, yada. So I recall this Reagan speech being quoted a lot at the time by Republicans even then. And as I was trying to squeeze in at the end of the music leading into our break, it was an interesting thing that, he makes no mention, Reagan does in this speech, of what might happen to your daughters who go to college and want to work professionally, because that just wasn't the thing for conservatives like Ronald Reagan way back in the ancient 1960s. But that's the reality of our world. By the way, quite honestly, that wasn't a bad thought. I mean, we never approached anything like it, but the idea that, well, maybe the government ought to intervene in some way to, if not mandate, then at least encourage doctors to move to areas with very little medical coverage, et cetera, et cetera. And, I understand that it was their fever dream that it would be done by fiat, but they've come up with no solution whatsoever to the idea or to the problem of lack of medical coverage in certain areas in the country. They couldn't even come up with something that would be of interest or acceptable to their side. And they never, as far as I know, certainly never enacted anything. They certainly haven't done much by way of proposing anything. And it's interesting. This was from like 1961. So we're talking, 60 years and they have come up with nothing. And I mean, I guess that means that there's simply nothing compatible with Republican ideology that would allow, and there's nothing in Republican ideology that would allow for, or around there, maybe a better way to put it is, everything about Republican ideology suggests that it would be unallowable under that ideology to do anything to improve access to quality medical care for vast swaths of rural America, which they claim to have at heart all the time. I'm only doing this because I represent heartland values, and I want to represent the poor rural folk who get left behind by the coastal elites and da. For 60 years, they haven't come up with a single enactable idea for getting more doctors to the heartland where the salt of the earth live and toil and could use a little medical coverage here and again. Fine, let them pay for it privately, but there's literally nothing. And I mean, I guess that's at bottom got to be true. If they're for unfettered markets, they just won't be able to come up with anything. But really, not even a tax incentive or a private scheme of some kind. It is pretty interesting. Republicans just really have zero interest in the health and well-being of people of the heartland, even though they've fought all the time. What they've really been doing is saying, well, we can't do anything to improve their health. What we need to do is make sure that the coastal elites don't do anything with the happy coincidence that they've got plenty of doctors and plenty of money and can afford to redistribute some things without destroying the overall economic system. But we got to make sure that doesn't lead to better health outcomes for them. That's the chief thing, right? It's not that, well, we should be improving. Couldn't we fight so that we could improve health care outcomes for all? No. Okay. Because that would be communism. So therefore, what we need to do is make sure that the coastal elites don't actually do much better with their health outcomes than the people who are living in doctor deserts in the middle of the country. And then that way we can say that's equality, that, and the free market brings it to us. We're not seeing people take advantage of things like the free market, for instance, on the coasts. We just have to make sure there will be interventions to make sure that we can't actually help, even with market forces, like, up until just about a week ago, negotiating for drug prices. We have, one massive buyer of pharmaceuticals, but they're forbidden from doing the negotiations that will help all parties bring prices down, all buying parties anyway, bring prices down, because then people on the coasts might have it better than people in the heartland, and everyone will realize 60 years and you haven't done squat about it. And that's just since 1961. I mean, for a long time before that, they also were reluctant or insistent upon doing nothing. Anyway, just thought I'd diverge from the text for a little bit to cover that. Conservatives still quote this speech a lot. We return now to Jonathan Chait from 2013, strangely considering it a prescient warning rather than evidence that their fears of big government are usually totally wrong. Paranoia is simply transferred from one event to the next. Conservatives likened the establishment of Social Security to socialism and tyranny. That too in my document. Reagan, speaking a quarter century later, and I mean, it seems like, that's such a long time, quarter century later. Now we realize, oh my God, so much time has passed that, far more time has passed since Reagan was even president, let alone made this speech, than had passed between the passage of Social Security and his complaint that Medicare would destroy America. But that's what was the case. Let's see. Reagan, speaking a quarter century later, assured his audience that he loved Social Security, but that Medicare surely would fulfill all those same warnings. Just moving the goalposts, changing the explanations, just like we're hearing with Trump now, as he did for all the things that got him impeached, all the things that should have gotten him impeached and didn't, and then his issue with the search warrant. Now they just changed the story. Social Security is awesome, but Medicare will definitely do all those things that we said Social Security would do, but were proven wrong. Okay, not Medicare. Okay, then Medicaid was okay. Not that. Well, then Clinton healthcare reform in the 1990s. Oh, well, not that. Well, then Obamacare in 2010. Oh, not that. Okay, well, then almost certainly anything that Democrats want to do now because they're all pedophiles and groomers as well. Let's just throw that in there. Okay. Republicans now, and that was in 2013, pledged their love for Medicare. Remember, this whole thing was set up by, well, okay, fine, Social Security is awesome, but Medicare sucks. Oh, Medicare is awesome? Okay, well, we love Medicare, but Obamacare will be the death knell for freedom. Cheney typically draws the usual lesson. President Reagan's words, spoken 52 years ago this weekend, still ring true. They actually ring quite false, with one modification, the word true. She writes, so she didn't write about the word true. If we don't defend our freedoms now against the onslaught of President Obama's policies, we won't have to wait until our sunset years for American freedom to be a distant memory. That's true. It's becoming a distant memory now, but thanks to a Republican president. But gosh, who could have predicted that? Well, not Liz Cheney. She would never have predicted that. She said it was all coming during Obama's administration, and what a terrible president he was, and golly, we have to get rid of him, because otherwise it's a inexorable march to authoritarianism. Not my party. They're not the ones doing it. The destruction of freedom keeps happening in America, and yet somehow not happening. It perpetually lies just over the horizon, close enough to keep refreshing the supply of right-wing paranoia. And an interesting conclusion, because it does give us a chance to make a closer examination of, well, what it is that we're arguing now, and what it is that people who are otherwise good Democrats who say, well, I wish Liz Cheney was able to stick around. What did we want her to do? And interestingly, it was that we now, for whatever reason, agree with her that finally, after nearing 100 years now, that Republicans have been saying the destruction of freedom and democracy was just around the corner. It was all due to whatever a Democratic administration and Democrats in Congress were trying to do next to help people. Oh, in the name of helping people, they're really going to destroy American freedom and democracy. We're on the brink of that. Why? Well, because Social Security. Years later. Oh, not because of Social Security? Well, then clearly because of Medicare. Oh, not because of Medicare? Well, then clearly because of the Clinton healthcare proposal. Oh, not because of the Clinton healthcare proposal? Well, then almost assuredly, right at the same time, when politics finally did become total war, it wasn't just one thing anymore. Not because of the Clinton healthcare policy, because we viciously defeated that. Oh, well, then it must be because of the Clinton economic stimulus package. Oh, not because of that, and that actually led to a decade-long economic boom that launched us into the stratosphere among the richest nations of the world. Okay, well then surely Obamacare and death panels. Oh, well, not Obamacare and death panels? Well, then almost assuredly something. Only now has one Republican and a handful of others elsewhere decided that, oh, well, actually what I think will destroy America is Donald Trump. Aha! Well, we finally agree on what will destroy America. Fantastic. But you might very well point out, you've just opted to team up with a Republican who has been wrong every other time about what was imminently about to destroy America, and who holds views that are consistent with the dozen or so other times before her time in politics that the Republican Party insisted that we were on the brink of destroying American freedom forever. Is it just possible, someone might ask, that she's wrong again and we're joining her in this incorrect assessment? Well, you got to hold out the possibility, but I think you can probably differentiate. For one thing, the big mistake she seemed to be making, and the Republicans were making all along, was that they were on the wrong side of history, but they were also on the other side of the political spectrum, and the only thing they could do about it was say that the Democrats were about to destroy America. Otherwise, they just had nothing to say about these programs being put forth that would help tremendous numbers of people. Well, everyone who's out there who will be helped will want these things to pass. The only way to sustainably oppose them is to worry aloud that they threaten to destroy American freedom forever and ever and ruin our democracy. And that's the only thing serious enough to get people to say, I don't know, getting help with paying my medical bill seems like a good idea. Or not eating cat food to survive might be a good idea. Having a basic level of income support for senior citizens and the disabled, and paying for or making possible for seniors to afford health care coverage, for the poor to afford some kind of access to health care, and then later for the middle class to perhaps maybe pay a little bit less to private insurers so that they can continue to have access to medical care. Maybe all those were mistakes. And the only time we got it right was when we realized, oh, I've been blaming the wrong party for the death of American democracy and the creeping authoritarianism that threatens to destroy it forever. Now I'm finally going to be right. To which we might say, yes, that is a big difference. So it's possible, right? But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting perspective on things, and a reminder of something more useful, perhaps, than just simply saying, oh, yeah, well, she's still a Republican at heart. And some of the things that she said were pretty crazy. That's true. She has kind of a weird paranoid history of thinking that American democracy is about to die. So the fact that she's, like the blind squirrel, been right once might not be all that terrific thing. In fact, it might even lead you to question whether or not we've been led into an alliance with a habitual Cassandra who's never been right about anything. But that's hard for us to believe. But that's an interesting addition to the debate, I think, at this point. All right, let's see. Anything else we need to throw in? Oh, yeah, there we go. Bruce McFarland comes with a pronunciation primer on something. That's yesterday's show was killing me. This morning when I was listening to it, Dominica. Okay, so I guess because I think Dominican Republic and Dominica, and I guess, I don't know, that's the anglicized version of how you would read it, but it's Dominica, which I guess, I don't know. Who cares? I don't know. I was going to say, it's not who cares. I care. I very much would care. I like to get things right. And I appreciate learning. I, of course, like most people, don't really particularly like just being called out as wrong, but I think it's being done in a constructive manner, certainly. Let's see. Starting it out as Dominica, as if you do want to say the name that ends in Republic. Oh, and 2 more points. But what? We haven't gotten to those yet? Oh, there they are. It just didn't say see this thread. All right. Well, let's see. So Dominica, okay, that makes more sense in pronunciation. But anyway, I don't know. I guess in what language, I'm not sure. But okay, so Dominica. I'm never going to remember that one. I'm too busy with Dominican Republic. Anyway, 2 more points were, 1, keeping old passports is entirely normal. I do have one. I have an old passport. It's just, and I said, there's plausible explanations for it. 1 regular expired passport, 1 expired diplomatic passport because he was, believe it or not, President of the United States, and then 1 active one. But I just wanted to point out the 3 passport. Oh, you know what? Well, I'll do it afterwards. Let me make his points first. Keeping old passports is entirely normal. Yes, check. If you ever have to fill in any visa applications, you may well have to give information contained in a passport before your current one. And, they don't claim your passport. They don't take your old one away from you when they give you a new one. I don't think. I mean, they never did that to me. 2 expired passports would be entirely normal for Trump to have in his personal papers from the White House. The one when he became president would have been canceled when he received his diplomatic passport, which would have been canceled when he left office. Indeed, since they expire after 10 years anyway, he likely had 2 or 3 or more in storage somewhere else, perhaps Trump Tower. That's likely true. And that brings me to my next point. A report of more than one active passport would be the trigger for off speculation about buying one just in case type passport. I will tell you that he's probably got one there. It just probably wasn't in Pervalago. But I guess what that brings me to, the point that brings me to, is that I saw yesterday that it turns out that by the time Trump was actively complaining about his passports having been, as he said, stolen from him by the FBI had already offered them back to him by the time he started grousing about this. And what that tells you is a couple of things. First of all, it tells you that in all likelihood, well, the first thing it tells you, and I think we noted this yesterday, was that the reason that the FBI had his passports at all wasn't because they were saying, oh my God, I think he's a flight risk and we have to take away his passport. Though he likely is a flight risk, and they likely do believe that. They just haven't gotten to that point in the investigation yet. And also, it might be fruitless to take away his passport for somebody who has access to private transport. He could probably make it out of the country pretty easily without a passport anyway. And there are probably plenty of places where he could land where they wouldn't bother asking for a passport when he got there either. Anyway, more to the point was that the reason that they had the passports was because they were in the boxes that they were sealing, and in boxes with other stuff that they intended to seize. But there were all these boxes with unsecured confidential and highly secret material in them. All they did was take the boxes. And Republicans also spent part of the day yesterday saying, how come, chin stroking, how come the manifest from the FBI, the property list that was seized during the warrant, doesn't list those passports? And the answer is because it's listed as, box 17 of documents. And in there is also these passports. The other thing I think it tells us is that besides the cravenness of trying to make political hay out of this thing after the FBI had already offered you your passports back, was that in all likelihood, Trump had no idea his passports were missing until the FBI contacted them and said, would you like to have these back? We don't really need these. There's a bunch of passports in here and you can have them. And so that tells you about how much he cared about having those passports, quote unquote, stolen. He didn't even know they were gone. And that's likely because he never has any idea where his passports are. And he probably was a little bit disturbed to find out that his active passport was there in one of those boxes. I don't know when he ever planned to go someplace where he wanted to or would need to land and need to have a passport with him when he landed. And I don't know how much demand there really is for his passport. And I don't know how much demand he's making about foreign travel either. But if he ever needed it, he probably would have had no idea where it was and would have been at a loss and might have had to have a new one issued anyway because it was just swept into a box of garbage as he was leaving the White House. So, at any rate, I thought that was of some interest to add to the story. He had no idea where his passport was. He had no idea that they were missing until the FBI told him that they had him. Anyway, yes, there's plenty of reason to believe that he would have 3 passports, 2 expired or whatever, in the box of most current things swept off of his desk. That doesn't tell us anything about what else is in Mar-a-Lago or Trump Tower or anywhere else or with him now at Bedminster. I wonder about somebody like him, whether he has somebody on his staff that travels with the important documents he needs as he moves between residences. Probably not. So he could get caught short without important documents, but, he could pay to have somebody fly them up if he needs them. But, yeah, I have very little doubt that with Paolo Zampoli in that business, certainly Zampoli must have approached him at some point and said, do you want one of these? Because, I get a piece of the action. If you do, he probably tried to sell him one and go, why should I have one of those? Well, you never know when you might need. It's always handy to have an extra passport in case yours gets revoked. And, you got reason to believe that the government might one day take yours. Why don't you buy 1 or 2 for yourself? The current wife, a couple of past wives, perhaps, maybe some of the kids, the ones that you like, if there are any. So anyway, those have not yet been recovered because they weren't filed with, not because they're seizing his passports, which they should do, but because they happen to be mixed in with nuclear secrets that they were trying to reclaim. All right. So, okay, we're up to date on commentary and feedback, I think, from previous shows. Yes, good, okay. And now, other important pieces of the puzzle. This I'll save for tomorrow because it's a long read and it's important. I think. So, let's see. Well, I don't know. We might be able to sneak this one in because they're pretty compact. It's a pretty compact read now that I think about it, but circulated to us by our Daily Coast friend Bethesda 1971 and therefore Twitter friend Bosengood. We have got this interesting reminder. Remember when we extracted a top spy from Russia after Trump mishandled classified intelligence? Oh yes. This is something to think about as we head out of the show for today and into tomorrow. And remember, the story continues, when we thought that in addition to the Mueller criminal investigation, that the FBI was running a separate counterintelligence investigation about Trump's ties to Russia. And remember how Deputy Attorney General Rod Land the Plane Rosenstein lied to the FBI? Oh, yeah, because he secretly killed the counterintelligence investigation without telling the FBI, which thought, FBI did, that Mueller was conducting a counterintelligence as well as criminal investigation. Ooh, that's right. This is detailed in a recent story by Alter Ego 55 over at Daily Coast. The reason Trump has appropriated U.S. classified documents, Alter Ego says, is far more sinister than you might think. Oh, and there are some competing theories about that. This Bethesda/Bosengood says, is my second story on Trump-Russia events few seem to remember, but need to be revisited in light of the FBI's search at Mar-a-Lago. The first story last Thursday was, remember when Trump gave security clearances to Kushner/Ivanka despite lies? Well, yes. Now, part one of this piece, the extraction. CNN reported on September 9th, 2019, exclusive U.S. extracted top spy from inside Russia in 2017. In a previously undisclosed secret mission in 2017, the U.S. successfully extracted from Russia one of the highest level covert sources inside the Russian government. Multiple Trump administration officials with direct knowledge told CNN. A person directly involved in the discussion said that the removal of the Russian was driven in part by concerns that President Donald Trump and his administration repeatedly mishandled classified intelligence and could contribute to exposing the covert source as a spy. The decision to carry out the extraction occurred soon after a May 2017 meeting in the Oval Office in which Trump discussed highly classified intelligence with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and then Russian Ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak. The intelligence concerning ISIS in Syria had been provided by Israel. Note, a recent post on Empty Wheels blog is the only recent mention of this issue I have found. So, early in the Trump administration, May 2017, according to CNN, our national security team did not trust the President of the United States to ensure the safety of highly placed spy in Russia, a highly placed spy. This was in the same time period when Trump disclosed classified information to Russian diplomats, Lavrov and Kislyak, in the White House. According to a New York Times story from the same time period, in September of 2019, 2 years later, the Moscow informant was instrumental to the CIA's most explosive conclusion about Russia's interference in the campaign, that President Vladimir Putin ordered and orchestrated it himself. Note that the same Times article also cited some CIA officers saying concerns about Trump's actions were not the reason for the spy's exfiltration. My research has not yet found any update on this difference between the Times and the CNN reports, but the circumstantial evidence, including the timing of the Lavrov-Kislyak meeting and the spy's role in outing Putin's aide to Trump, gives credibility to CNN's report. The Phantom counterintelligence investigation is up next, and that's the really infuriating part. And I'll leave that one to you to read because we're just about out of time here. But the gist of this is, remember that the FBI ceased its own counterintelligence investigation of the Trump-Russia connection because it was given the impression by Rod Rosenstein that Mueller would be handling that. And then all of a sudden, his report comes out. Now, why he didn't say at any point, hey, I'm not doing that, I don't know. But I guess he still thought that the FBI might be doing that work too. And a lot of contemporaneous work, opportunity rather, to contemporaneously expose what was going on, or what had gone on, was lost. And they had to try and prove that after the fact 2 years down the road. I think that was a pretty remarkable oversight on everybody's part. And good point to bring it up, and perhaps we can read through Empty Wheel's post about that sometime later in the week. As I said, there were alternative theories still floating out there, and one of them I think I put away last night, but now I don't see it immediately. Maybe I retweeted it and I'll have to dig it up. But apparently Michael Cohen, who, maybe we shouldn't bother believing him about anything, but he had a theory. It was at least newsworthy that he told newspapers about it. His theory about why Donald Trump had all that classified information. Believe it or not, his theory was, and it is hard to believe, that he wanted to hold it onto it as a bargaining chip, that he thought that he would be in legal jeopardy even outside of this, and he actually thought that at some point he might be able to talk his way out of being prosecuted for something else by threatening to expose that information. That me and my supporters and my loyalists will give this critical information to our enemies if you prosecute me. So if you want the United States to be able to live securely in the future, you better not prosecute me. I'll kill you all rather than face the consequences of my action. Wow, is that fantastical? That's beyond what I'm able to believe.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
But then again, the entire history of the Trump administration has been about exceeding what I'm able to believe about how bad he is. So you never know. We'll think about that for the rest of the day as I hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. You know what it's going to be about. A lot of stuff. So stay tuned.